Welcome back to my channel. My name is Kate, and I have been gone again for a little bit. Work has been keeping me super busy, but I am going to try to get back into posting. I feel like I say this too often, so I'll keep it short and sweet. I will be talking today about the books that I read in May. I will be having some episodes coming out where I do recent reads for the books that I read between, I think, February and April. So keep an eye out for those. So today I have 15 books to talk about that I read in the month of May, and I have one DNF. I was participating in the Escape the Readathon that Lexi over at Books with Lexi runs, which was super fun. I did not record which prompts I read these books for, but if you ever see that readathon pop up, I would highly recommend it. It's just a fun time. It is a little chaotic, but it's always fun. So without any further ado, I will get into the first one. And if I'm trying to keep the glare minimized with my glasses, just because I don't want to put contacts in today, so apologies for the slight glare that I may have as I talk to you guys. The first book that I'm going to be talking about is my DNF. I did have some others that I didn't fully finish in May, but this is the one that is kind of worth talking about. I don't know that it'll be very interesting to talk about the other DNFs. This is a contemporary romance, which is not a romance subgenre that I read very often, but I had heard Izzy from Happy for Now talking about how great this one was, and I definitely don't disagree. I think I just started to get frustrated with it. But anyway, it is In a Jam by Kate Canterbary. The basic premise for this one is that the female main character, Shay, has just inherited a tulip farm in the town she grew up in, and basically her life's been upended by being left at the altar, so she moves back home and ends up running into an old friend, Noah, who's running a farm in that same hometown, and they end up developing a sort of marriage of convenience because because Shay has to get married to keep her inherited farm. So, it has sort of second chance romance vibes because Noah always had a thing for Shay that Shay didn't actually know about at all. She just thought they were friends. And so it has a little bit of that vibe to it. Definitely small town romance. And then Noah is taking care of his niece after his sister is no longer able to do so. And so there's sort of that element as well. And a lot of this I liked. I think the humor is great. I really enjoy all of the friends around Noah and Shay. And at the beginning, I really liked the pining and sort of the character development between Noah and Shay was really fun. And I found as it kept going, this book is quite long for a contemporary romance. It's like 480 pages. And I ended up getting about 50% of the way through. And I was just kind of over the baggage and the trauma going back and forth between them. And it just kind of had lost some of the magic for me. It just felt too slow. And I think really what killed it for me is that this is sort of slow burn. I started having an issue with Noah's perspective being like super horny, and I don't know why it bothered me so much because I don't mind spice in my romance novels. I don't need it to be closed door, but something about the way it shifted and the way he gets really possessive and almost demanding about the way he thinks Shay needs to be doing things just really rubbed me the wrong way. So I had to stop because I was starting to dislike it, and I think it could be something that maybe I try again later on because it has potential. I almost never read contemporary romance, but for the first maybe 30-40% of this, I thought it might be the rare contemporary romance that works for me. And I'm a little reluctant to give up on that, so I'll probably try it again some point in the future. I don't know if it's allergies or what, but my voice is giving out on me a little bit today, so apologies for the sound variation on that, but I have water with me now that I can use as we go. Okay, now we are shifting into the books that I actually did end up reading in the month of May, and I am going to be starting with my lowest rated and working my way up to my favorites of the month. So if you don't want to hear somewhat ranty opinions on a couple books, maybe skip this section and I'll get into more positive thoughts. But unfortunately, I do have a couple 2 stars that just really didn't work for me, and I know they're pretty well loved, so these might be hot takes. So if they are favorite books of yours, I'm sorry if my opinions are hurtful. Alright, so the first one I'm going to talk about is Service Model by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I've had pretty mixed luck with Tchaikovsky. I have really loved Guns of the Dawn, really hated Ironclads, and kind of DNF'd his, Shadows of the Apt, whatever the bug fantasy is. DNF'd that one because it just wasn't my speed. And unfortunately, Service Model is another one that honestly I would have DNF'd if I hadn't had the audiobook. The audiobook is narrated by Tchaikovsky himself, and he does a fantastic job with the narration. So I think if you're really into a specific type of cozy adjacent fiction about robots, you could really enjoy this. For me, it was just a ton of pet peeves that really, really don't work for me. I have friends who really enjoy this book, and I thought that it had potential, but the main motivation for me is that it's nominated for a Hugo this year. I am trying to read through all the Hugo nominations because not only am I voting this year, but I'm going to go to Worldcon, so I wanted to get a sense of the books before I do any voting, obviously. And the premise for this one is that the main character, Charles, is a robot valet in a sort of future that's has a lot in similar with similar to WALL-E, where robots have really taken over a lot of the roles for people, and they've kind of faded out of doing a lot of stuff for themselves. But Charles's master that he works for dies in an accident that Charles may or may not have been involved in. You kind of figured that out as you go through the story. I think that there are a lot of nods to classic literature in this, both sci-fi adjacent and not adjacent, that I think if you're super into some of those classics, it's kind of fun to see how he's playing off of it. So several different parts in this. I'll just use this first one as an example. So there's 5 parts in this, I think, and they all have sort of some robot designation for a classic author. So obviously in this case it's Christie, like Agatha Christie, which is the part where he finds his master dead. If you enjoy stories, it did make me think a bit of Monk and Robot, where you have a robot trying to figure out what he's going to do with himself now. And I think where I got really frustrated with this is Tchaikovsky really plays around with these robotic logic loops where they're introduced to a situation that logically doesn't make sense to them, that they could do something else, even though the thing that their logic leads them to is dumb. Why would you do that? So it's kind of playing with that. There's a ton of philosophy in here. A lot of navel gazing from Charles as he figures out what he's gonna do. It's just so heavy on that I really got frustrated and bored with all the navel gazing and the philosophy. And Charles is a very naive character because he's a robot that doesn't has specific logic that he runs his life by, but as a human looking in, you know way more than he does. And I hate that kind of perspective. It's just a personal thing that I can't stand naive main characters where I know way more than they do. I know some folks really like that, and if you do, I think this might be a good fit for you, but for me, that's just super frustrating. So I really didn't like that. Tchaikovsky has a tick in this that normally I'm not necessarily bothered by writing style choices, but he does this thing a lot in this book where he can't say that Aunt Charles is scared or angry or whatever it is, because it's an emotion that robots don't feel. And so what he'll say is, Aunt Charles couldn't feel angry because robots don't feel anger, but if he did, it would feel like this. And it's just like, no. You can't do that. He doesn't feel that way. And it just, as a tick, drives me insane because it feels lazy. Like you couldn't find a way to describe it without ascribing it to an emotion the robot's not supposed to have. Like frustrating. And then the other thing I'll say about this that isn't necessarily a drawback for me, but might be for other folks, the humor is so dry. So dry. Even for British humor, incredibly dry. So I think the delivery is a lot easier to catch if you're listening to the audiobook because you can hear it in Tchaikovsky's voice. I think it's much harder to catch when you're just reading it, but if you like dry humor, I think this is a very strong example of it, and it leans pretty heavily into that. So I think it makes me think cozy in terms of following the robot's journey and the philosophy elements, but also it's really cynical on, like, sort of how far we could go down the track of having robots do things for us and what that would mean for the world. So I can see the kind of sci-fi fan this is for, and I wouldn't necessarily be mad if this won the Hugo Award for Best Novel, but it's not for me. So this one was a 2-star. I'm a little scared because I don't know if I like either of the Tchaikovsky novels that are up for the awards this year, and I don't know if I'll keep picking his books up if I keep struggling with them. So we'll see. Okay, I'm gonna try to not be too long-winded, but I know I'm already gonna make this super long, so we'll see who hangs out for it. Alright, the next one that I'm going to talk about, which was also 2-star, and frankly even more disappointing to me than Service Model, because on the surface, this feels like I should love it, and it has the most incredible cover. And that is the Fireborne Blade by Charlotte Bond. Like, seriously, look how cool that dragon is. Like, good, I don't know if you guys will be able to see with my face in the way. Anyway, I love this cover. I'm so disappointed because I think I'm gonna have to unhaul it because this just isn't for me. The premise is that the main character, Madeleine, who's on the cover here, is a knight who's essentially been disgraced, and in order to make a name for herself again, she basically has to go get a legendary weapon that is guarded by this white dragon that you see on the cover. I love Lady Knights. I love dragons. This 100% should have been for me, and just on a writing style level is like an anti-Kate book. The story is told with some timeline jumps from Madeleine's perspective, and then it's interspersed with sort of excerpts from dragon hunting books, which could have been cool if you'd done it in a novel. But in a novella, for me at least, I know it doesn't bug other people necessarily, but it's so short. I felt like I was getting whiplash because I'd get settled in one timeline, then we'd jump to an excerpt, then we would jump back to Madeleine's perspective, but years before. And it was just, it just felt like I could never settle into the story. And my other main gripe about this is this feels like a book where the author doesn't trust the reader to pick up on details. There's a couple different spots in this story where information is given and then it's repeated, like the next page, in a very slightly different manner. And it's like, that was a page ago. I already remember that. You don't have to tell me again. So I found that hyper frustrating. The themes are super on the nose. It is very much a fuck the patriarchy vibe with this one. And I I don't dislike that as a theme. I just wish there had been more nuance to it. What I get frustrated with that theme a lot is that it feels like it's never the subtle vibes of patriarchy that we're talking about. It's like the hyper-oppressive, obviously misogynistic vibes where they're like ready to cut women down at any moment. It's never like the subtle things that keep people in those positions. Like that's my frustration. I just want you to do something interesting with it. So very frustrated by this one. I think if you really like stories about lady knights and dragons, I think the dragon hunting element is super cool. If you're not as bothered by timeline shifts and like excerpts in a shorter story, this could really work for you. I have friends who love this book. I'm just so frustrated that it wasn't for me because it just really feels like it should have been. And I feel like that's the worst kind of 2-star or 1-star, where like you had these expectations you were going to love it, and then not only did you not love it, but you actively disliked it. So, I don't know. There is a sequel to this. The ending actually had me somewhat intrigued, and I don't know if I'll continue, but I'm slightly more tempted than I would have been without that ending. So, we'll see. The next 2 books that I have to talk about are both graphic novels. I don't own these. I got them from the library. And they were both 3-star reads. I don't think they're bad. They don't really stand out to me necessarily. So the first, and both of them are on the nomination list for the Hugos for Best Graphic Story. So, the first one that I will talk about is We Called Them Giants by Kieron Gillen and Stephanie Hans, who's the artist. And I really liked a graphic novel series from them called Die, which had a very strong, like, it was sort of like Portal fantasy, but dark and involving D&D, and that was super fun. This one, is sort of sci-fi, but super hand-wavy with it. So the premise is that basically a bunch of people on Earth disappear, like maybe raptured, maybe not. The main character is sort of like a troubled teen who's living with foster parents, and she's one of the people left behind. And they have no idea if everybody's like gone to heaven or if they just disappeared or what the story is. But it's her kind of working with a couple other people who are left to try and survive, and then they start running into these giant figures, so obviously we called them giants. And the art in this is gorgeous. I'll put up a panel somewhere over here to show you guys some of that, because I loved the art in this, but the story just feels like a fever dream for a lot of it. I don't understand if it's supposed to be sci-fi or fantasy or exactly where it's inhabiting. I think I understand the idea that Gillen was going towards. I can't get into it for spoilery reasons in case you want to pick this one up. But you have to like this on vibes. And for me, I think it's pretty forgettable. Other than the art, I probably would have given this a 2 if not for the art. So this one just doesn't stand out for me. The next one I have to talk about is the other graphic novel, which is the first volume of The Hunger in the Dusk, which is basically orcs and humans have been fighting each other over territory and resources for a number of years. I want to say it's like hundreds of years. I don't really remember. And then they start dealing with these creatures that come like across the seas that almost have sort of like a zombie vibe to them, but intelligent. And so the orcs and humans basically have to work together to deal with these new invaders or be wiped out. So it has an interesting idea behind it, and the main story follows a mercenary band who's charged with like escorting an orc princess. I don't even remember why they're escorting her, but the issue I have with it is that the characters just aren't interesting. I don't remember either of their names. All of the character dynamics feel like things I've seen in fantasy a million times. So really the only part of this graphic novel that stood out to me is sort of that interplay, the larger like political interplay between the orcs and the humans. where they have completely different value systems and perspectives on how they should be doing things. And so that part was interesting, but I couldn't latch on to any of the character relationships because I didn't care. So I'm somewhat tempted to continue the series because on a plot level I think it could be interesting, but I'm a fairly character-driven reader, so it's hard for me to stay interested in a story without that character connection. So maybe I'll continue, maybe I won't. Another Hugo-nominated graphic novel that I probably won't be putting very high on my list. The next read I have to talk about is also a 3-star read, and this one I picked up on audio because I just needed an audiobook to listen to while I had to do some chores, and that is Keeper of Enchanted Rooms, I think. Yeah, Keeper of Enchanted Rooms by Charlie N. Holmberg. And I have pretty mixed feelings on this. It's sort of set up as a historical fantasy sort of alternate world where magic is passed down through bloodlines, and as it's being passed down, it's being diluted. There's a sort of hereditary aspect to the magic, and one of the main characters, it's something, Merritt Fernsby. I have my notes right here so that I can remember some of these. Merritt basically ends up inheriting a magical house, and he's an author, so he just wants to go to this house and be able to write in peace. And the house is sentient, and they don't get along at first. And so Merritt has to figure out how to work things out with his enchanted house, and ends up being helped out by someone from a magical organization. God, what is her name? I don't even remember. Hulda Larkin. Clearly this book did not stand out to me, obviously, already. But anyway, Hulda is a housekeeper who is used to helping people with enchanted houses, sentient houses. So the beginning was really fun because you got to see them working things out with the house. I really like that as an element. It made it really fun for me. I have to admit that the hereditary nature, because then what that the hereditary nature of the magic sort of leads into this almost like selective breeding eugenics thing that made me feel a little uncomfortable. I mean, like, it's just kind of the way that magic system works, but I don't necessarily care for that as an element. You also get the villain's point of view as you go through. You kind of get to see why they became a villain. And it feels like it's equating something to villainy that I'm, again, not super comfy with. I think what it boils down to is that I feel like I understand too much of how the author thinks about some of these things, because there's also a throwaway line about how about servitude being the best way for a poorer family to, like, raise their family up. And, like, did people do that? Yes. Is that the best way? Probably not. It just feels almost like an anti-Olivia Atwater, where instead of talking about, like, oppression and the way systems don't benefit groups of people, you're just like, oh yeah, that's the way it is. And I just don't love that as sort of like a, and it doesn't feel like it's a conscious theme. It feels like there's just some comments. That's what I mean when I say I don't want to put words in the mouth of the author, but it just gives me an uncomfortable feeling with the book. Because I don't know the author. I don't know what their perspective is. It's just there's some ideas in here that I find unappealing. The reason I'm giving this 3 stars instead of something lower is that I think if you don't really care about some of the themes that I found more and more interesting to me, where you're talking about oppression, you're talking about, like, different power structures. If you don't care about that element and you just want something that's cozy, that has some magic in it, that has interesting, like, magical societies and sentient houses, I think you could really enjoy this. And I'm not trying to cast aspersions any one way on that. It's just, for me, on a thematic level, that's less appealing, but I can see where if you just want to have a cozy, fun time, this could fit that vibe. Okay, now, one I actually do own again, and was a pre-order, and I am delighted that I ended up loving this. That is Wooing the Witch Queen by Stephanie Burgis. This was a risk for me in a lot of ways, because fantasy romance, which this has elements of, super hit or miss for me. I love some, I dislike some I just bounce off of. Cozy fantasy, same story. There are certain types of cozy fantasy that work for me, a lot that don't. And this is basically a mix between those two things. It has a lot of elements of cozy fantasy. You have sort of found family. You essentially have Saskia, who is the wicked sorceress, and she ends up hiring Felix, I think his name is, who is it Felix? I don't remember. Oh, yeah. You have Felix, who is basically an archduke, but not in a position of power, and ends up running away from, frankly, a terrible situation, and masquerades as a dark wizard who gets hired to bring Saskia's magical library into shape. And, or order, I guess, bring it into order. I had a friend recommend this to me because I really enjoyed Dreadful earlier this year, which had a lot of sort of cozy fantasy, but also dark vibes. Again, that's what I tend to like in Kingfisher stories. And thankfully this worked pretty well for me. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. So I really liked the main characters. I liked that both of them are dealing with trauma that they are trying to work through. They are both good people deep down that society has kind of used and abused, and so it's interesting to see them find each other. It is a very slow burn romance that, again, to me, this reads less like the new adult tone you find in some fantasy romance, and more like you took an adult sort of semi-historical romance and put fantasy elements into it. It has much more of the plot beats of more like a romance than like a fantasy romance, if that makes sense. So I think people who maybe don't jive with some of the plot beats of stuff like Serpent and the Wings of Night or Fourth Wing or any of these that have somewhat more of like that like high action, fast-paced fantasy romance who want something quieter, more slow burn, I think this is a better fit. And I'm saying that as one of those people. I also really loved that this is Grump Sunshine, but reverse genders of what you usually see Grump Sunshine, and that to me is an immediate win. I love when the grumpy protective person is more of the feminine person in the relationship, because I feel like a lot of times you get used to seeing the reverse, where it's always the guy. So that was fun. Felix is absolutely a cinnamon roll. He's so sweet. But there's also a lot of banter. I had a bit of a discussion with a friend about this because it feels a little weird to call him a cinnamon roll when there's so much teasing and banter, because you don't always see that with cinnamon roll characters. But it's still hard not to characterize him that way because he is so sweet and gentle. So I think this is really fun. It handled the sort of the power dynamics and the disguise and the lying in a way that I thought was really well handled. It wasn't like anyone was really being taken advantage of. It is solved pretty easily, and I think that's really the reason this is more of like a 3.5 instead of a 4-star read for me, is that there's a lot of plot conveniences where things just work out for the character. Like right before they need a skill, they'll do something that involves them learning that skill, and it's just a little like, okay. And I think Felix is so sweet, but sometimes he doesn't feel like a real character because he never steps wrong. With Saskia, he always knows the right thing to say to like stand out as a supportive male figure for her. And I wish he had struggled a little bit more is the main thing. Like, so like, I would compare this to Maya from the Goblin Emperor, where Maya is sweet and he always wants to do the right thing, but sometimes in the course of trying to do the right thing, he screws up. And I just never felt like I got that from Felix. So that's where he started to feel more like an archetype than a character in parts to me. So that was my one struggle with this book. I'm still obviously going to keep it. I put a bunch of tabs in it. I really enjoyed it. I just think that if you're a super plot-driven reader, some of those conveniences might bug you. But overall, I'll just remember this as like a cozy, fun time. And one of the times that something that's both cozy fantasy and has elements of like romantic fantasy really worked for me. The next one I'm going to talk about is a sci-fi, and this is one that I knew going in was going to be a gamble for me because I don't really like hard sci-fi. A lot of times it lingers on scientific explanations that I don't really understand and therefore bore me. So I knew it had elements of sort of weird physics in it, and it really delves into this idea of AI gods and sort of the way that they are guiding humans, but kind of forcing humans along a path. So the book is The Outside by Ada Hoffman. I picked this up because I'm in a book club that chose to read it in May, and I was willing to take a chance on it because I know some of the people in that group I tend to align with, and they really enjoy it. And I think somewhat mixed opinions on it, but I think overall I enjoyed it. Another 3.5-star read for me. And the basic premise is that it follows this autistic scientist who ends up having to step in on a big project in space after her mentor basically disappears, and she's the only person who worked with her mentor on like the lead up to this project, so she's the only one who can help. And it ends up she's dealing with science that she only partly understands because her mentor is the one who developed it. So she's a very smart person, and I really liked her as a character. It's just the beginning is so good with the cosmic horror vibes where she's kind of in over her head on this fairly dangerous knowledge and ends up being coerced into helping find her mentor for these AI gods. And the AI gods part was so cool. It is, in a lot of ways it reminds me of Dead Space by Kelly Wallace, where you have sort of this aesthetic of AI that's so far in the future where you really get visual descriptions of what these part machine, part humans look like, that are called angels that work for the gods. You don't ever see the gods in person, but you hear a lot about them. I loved the themes around how much you could trust what the gods were doing for humans, because you can't really step out of line with them. Like, that whole thing was super cool. I think in the second half, it lost me quite a bit because it gets more into the weird physics. And I haven't read Annihilation, but it has, from what I understand of that one, some of a similar feel of very out there, weird science that's, in this one at least, is not well explained. It just you kind of have to roll with it. So if you like super hard science, this is hit or miss with that. There are also sections where it's clear that physics is something that Ada Hoffman's super into, and as someone who's not into that, sometimes the explanations we did get were too much for me. I don't care how the science works, just tell me a cool story. So it lost me a little bit there, but I liked the autistic representation with Ysera. I really like that her girlfriend is helping her out with a lot of this, who is not autistic, and kind of seeing them navigate their relationship and how much her girlfriend supports her and feels like an important part of her life and her support structure. I also really love the way it delves into the amount of support that Ysera got as an autistic student, meaning that she has a different perspective on people than her mentor, who received not only no support, but was dealing with a lot of abuse because she understood the world differently. So, like, you get that difference in perspective that I thought was super fascinating. So, I don't know. I think the hard part about The Outside is that it's hard to know the kind of reader who's really going to get into this, because it has elements of hard sci-fi, but also extremely thematic in a sort of Le Guin way. So I think if you were okay with both of those sides and you want something that is thematic, that has interesting characters and interesting explorations of AI, I still would recommend this. The more I think about it, the more I want to continue with the series and see where the author goes with it. But I think it had some pieces that didn't work as well for me, which is where it lands sort of between 3.5 and 4 stars. I'll probably round up to 4 when I talk about it on Goodreads, but it is sort of somewhat of a mixed bag for me. Oh man, I said I was going to try and not be long-winded. We can all see where that's going. Alright, we are finally to my 4 stars. These will probably be pretty quick because I have less to say about them. The first one that I have to talk about is a book that I am so excited I ended up giving this 4 stars because I love the movie, and I saw Fairy Loot do a special edition for it, and I really wanted it just based on the movie, but I hadn't read the book, and that is Kiki's Delivery Service by Eiko Kadono. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I am sorry if I am not. I freaking love this special edition, so I am so pleased that I ended up enjoying this in a lot of ways. This and this is one of those adaptations where I saw the movie first, and then going back and reading the book is kind of nice because I like both versions. They're not very similar, but not exactly the same. I think this is closer than like Howl's Moving Castle was. But it's basically middle grade, coming of age fantasy where the main character, if you've not seen it, it's the plotline of the movie. But if you haven't seen the movie, the main character is a young witch who has to basically go out into the world and make a name for herself at a new town as part of her coming of age sort of trial to prove herself. And ends up doing that with her talking cat, Gigi. And man, this was so cute. I think in some ways I actually like this more than I like the movie, because I really liked seeing Kiki find a place for herself in this new town that's very different from the town she grew up in. She deals with homesickness. She deals with people not really being used to witches. And so her having to prove the value of having a witch in the town and get to know the townsfolk. I really like that there's a moment that could have been like Not Like Other Girls. And this is written like in the 80s, like 85, I think. And then the author turns it around, and it's so sweet, and I really like the way the book handled this. It is not as bittersweet as the movie. It's a lot more focused on a really positive message for like the younger girl audience, and I just think it's a great example of a cozy middle grade fantasy coming of age that you could easily read at any time, and it's just super sweet. So I'm not, obviously, in my late 30s, the target audience for this. So it's not quite a 5-star because it's harder for me to connect to a younger main character like that. But I think this is very sweet, and I'm glad I read it, and I'm so glad that I have this pretty edition of it. The next 4-star that I have to talk about is a T. Kingfisher story, which I had picked up because last year I read A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking, and this is very much in line with that. It is called Minor Mage. Similar to Wizard's Guide, it follows a young mage who doesn't have a lot of super useful magic powers ends up in a situation where essentially the adults completely fail him. His village is going through a drought. He's the only wizard. So they essentially strong-arm him out of town while his mom is off on her own adventure, so she can't step in to save him. And force him to go find a way to bring water back to their village. And it's like, Kingfisher does such a good job of showing and having the main character Oliver think about the reasons the villagers have done this to him, because he's grown up with them. They love each other, but also they fail him by forcing him to do this. No adult is offering to accompany him. They are essentially forcing him out the door on a dangerous quest with only his armadillo familiar as a companion, in the hopes of bringing back water. And so I love that Kingfisher doesn't make Oliver instantly forgive these adults for making this choice for him. You really kind of see him grapple with that as the story goes. And this is definitely... It's funny because Kingfisher says in the acknowledgements that she intended this as a middle grade book, but that because it has fairly dark elements to it, in terms of the danger Oliver faces, in terms of what the adults in his life do, that some people don't consider it middle grade. I would consider it middle grade. I think there are great lessons in here. It is quite dark. So I think you would have to be careful about how you read this with a kid, and which kids you gave it to, right? But I think there's a lot that I really like about this. I think the reason it's not 5-star for me, like Wizard's Guide was, is that there is a lot of traveling in this, because you're basically following Oliver as he goes on this adventure with the armadillo. Oliver is a great character. He does not have a lot of magical powers. He's a minor mage, right, as the title says. And it's just really great to see him screw up and have the armadillo's like snarky commentary about it. But he's a kid. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's trying to figure it out. So I really like the way Kingfisher explores that. I think it's kind of nice to have a story like, because it's middle grade doesn't mean it has to be sweet and lovely all the time. I like seeing them explore some darker themes sometimes. So your own perspective might change. I don't have kids, so maybe that influences what I consider, yes, this is middle grade, or no, it isn't. But I think it's really well done. And I think the travel got to be a little bit much for me. In parts, I started to get a little bored with it feeling repetitive. But I think overall it's still Kingfisher. It still has her humor. It still has her great characters that I tend to love. So I would definitely still recommend this one. But I'm not sure it's one of her strongest, is the only thing I would say. As far as on a plot level. On a theme level, yes. On a plot level, less so. Next, we have another Hugo-nominated graphic novel, and this one I also don't own physically, so I'll put a picture here. It is Star Trek Lower Decks Warp Your Own Way by Ryan North and Chris Fenoglio, I think, is the artist. And this is, of all of the Hugo-nominated graphic novels, this is the one that I thought would be least successful for me, which is funny that it ends up in the 4-star category. Because I have never watched Star Trek Lower Decks. Honestly, I didn't have a lot of interest in it because it felt like you had to be like a Star Trek fan. And I've enjoyed the first season of Next Generation. I've seen a couple of the movies, but like I wouldn't call myself a Trekkie, right? I don't know all the lore. So I kind of thought that might be a hindrance for me in enjoying this. And it was a pleasant surprise that honestly it wasn't. This is sort of like a choose your own adventure with the main character is Mariner, who's basically the daughter of like the captain of the ship, and is kind of like, you can tell even just in this graphic novel that she's like a bit of a screw up who doesn't take things super seriously, and the whole story is built around every time Mariner wakes up and sort of has like a Groundhog Day thing where she's living the same day over and over again. And at the end of the day, something terrible happens every single time. And she's trying to figure out what's going on, like why she keeps reliving this day and why it's always like catastrophic stuff at the end of it. And it was kind of fun to have that sort of choose your own adventure in a graphic novel format and have like almost like a sci-fi explanation for why it's happening. So it was fun. I think where this suffers a little bit for me is that I don't have any connection to this because I haven't watched the show. So like it didn't keep me from enjoying it, but it also couldn't really be a 5-star because I don't know anything that's happening necessarily. And because you basically read and then find the catastrophic thing and then flip back and pick a different choice and read and find the right? Like, it started to really feel repetitive, and I wish it had gotten to its point faster, or maybe I wish I had found the path that would have led me to more of the answers faster. So, it's really my only real complaint about it. I enjoyed the humor. I enjoyed Mariner as sort of a fun character to follow. The art was fun. So especially if you like the show, I think you should pick this up. If you don't like the show and don't have as much familiarity with Star Trek, I definitely think you could still enjoy it. It's just whether or not you enjoy that sort of choose your own adventure. So, like I said, 4 stars. Had a good time. Okay, we are now to the 5 stars, my favorites of the month, and this first one that I'm going to talk about feels like it barely counts, I'll be honest, because this is the 7th time I have read this story, and I probably wouldn't have picked it up again, but I started watching the adaptation, and that is All Systems Red by Martha Wells, the first book in the Murderbot series. This TV show just came out. I've been enjoying watching it, but despite having read this 7 times since it came out, or 6 times, I guess, prior to this, I didn't remember all the details on it, and I wanted to refresh my memory on what happens in this because the show is closely following what happens in this first book, at least so far. So it was a good time. 5 stars. Murderbot's always 5 stars for me. Well, I guess some of the books aren't in the series, but this one's always 5 stars. So, you've heard about Murderbot. I love it. Not everybody does, but I love my anxious robot, and I am so far enjoying the show. Another 5-star read for me that honestly was a surprise because I didn't think I would love this quite as much, and that is the final Hugo-nominated graphic novel I have to talk about, and that is The Deep Dark by Molly Knox Ostertag. This is a queer coming-of-age story where the main character, Mags Herrera, is growing up in this small town that it's sort of like, it's in the desert somewhere in the U.S. I would guess Arizona somewhere. I'm not totally sure. Maybe it says and I just forgot about it. But Mags has lived her whole life with this monster that she has to care for and feed, but is very difficult on her life. She's also taking care of her grandmother, who is obviously elderly and is not doing as well, so she's the primary caretaker while also working and trying to finish high school. So it's a lot of sort of family elements to it. Then Mags's one of her childhood friends comes back to town, and they reconnect and are starting to try and figure out if they want to try and pursue a relationship together. And it brings up all this old history related to this monster that Mags has been dealing with her whole life. And man, I loved this so much. All of the characters in this story are complicated, complex people that make decisions that hurt each other sometimes. And I appreciate that it's not all good or bad. There are definitely people that are making choices that are frustrating, but also are sympathetic, and you understand why they're making the choices they're making. I really appreciate having that kind of character depth in a graphic novel. I love how queer-centered this is. Mags is, I don't know if she's bisexual or lesbian, I do not remember, but she's pursuing a relationship, situationship with someone who is already in a relationship that's not a great spot for her to be in, but her friend who comes into town is trans, and parts of her family also have some queer elements. So it's like just woven throughout this story. I loved seeing that explored. There's a complicated family dynamic for Mags. There's complicated history between Mags and her friend who's come to town, Nessa. I just really love the depth of character work in this. The art is great. I particularly like that this is one of those graphic novels that knows how to use visuals instead of having to put everything in text, which is one of my pet peeves in graphic novels. You have a visual medium, use it. And I love how Ostertag does that. I think she does a brilliant job with this one. It is magical realism, so I think you have to be on board that because it's never totally clear if the monster in Mag's life is a real monster, like a literal monster, or if it's representing something else. I don't necessarily mind that on a magical realism level. I just really grew to like the characters and sort of the journey that you're on with them. So I would highly recommend this if you like those sorts of elements. And it is absolutely going to be my top pick for the Hugo-nominated graphic novels. Okay, we're getting down to the final books now. Whew, I am sorry this is so long. I am way too long-winded, but trying to keep my thoughts down here. The next one I'm going to talk about is a nonfiction that I had read something else by this author that was nonfiction that I really liked earlier this year, and I am so pleased that I enjoyed this even more than the previous one, and that is Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. So I have somewhat of a mixed history with John Green's writing. I don't always vibe with his young adult fiction. It just doesn't really work as well for me. But I really enjoy his nonfiction. So I read Anthropocene Reviewed earlier this year via audio, which he narrates. He also narrates this and does an amazing job. So I think, for whatever reason, his nonfiction just works great for me. And I will definitely pick up any other nonfiction that he comes out with. This one was really interesting because it is sort of a dive into the history and the impact on global medicine of tuberculosis, the ways in which racism and imperialism has kind of led to tuberculosis initially being perceived as sort of this romantic illness that affected like poets and artists, and we lost them too soon, and like when they were being when wealthy white people were being impacted, and then really gets into once it became perceived less in that romantic sense because it was being like there were other groups being impacted by it because of industrialization. The conditions for tuberculosis really started hitting some of the bigger cities where obviously it's not just white folks in those cities. A lot of times in some of these cramped apartments, you have people of all different classes. You have people who were not prioritized at all in terms of healthcare and were flat out ignored. And it's depressing in parts that we have done this to each other. It's also eye-opening because myself, along with I'm sure other people, think of tuberculosis as something that happened in like the 19th century. Not something that is still around and is still killing people. And I love that John Green brought all of this up, pointed out the ways in which we are failing each other, and the ways in which we can do better. And if we really put the effort in, we can get rid of tuberculosis as a disease. We can make it so that it does not kill the amounts of people that it is killing now. So I appreciate that call to action, that kind of, I don't want to say deep dive because it's a pretty small book, but like really digging into the history and the effects of that. I love that he provides a suggested further reading at the end of this, because it'll probably lead to me doing my own deep dive on the history and the effect of this. And I also appreciate that he weaves in sort of those historical elements and the scientific elements with the story of Henry Ryder, who is the young boy in Sierra Leone that he got to know that got him interested in the topic. And you really get to see sort of the trials that Henry has been through, and kind of the ways in which the medical system failed him, but also the ways in which he has managed to survive this awful disease. And I just really, really appreciate that human element, that personal element to it. I think it's very easy with something like a disease that's been around for so long to feel like sort of a clinical aspect to it. So it really brings those personal touches. It's super approachable, even as someone who is not a science or medical knowledgeable person at all. It was very, very approachable. I really enjoyed the audiobook. I would highly recommend this. I think this is going to be in my favorite books of the year, just because it's the kind of nonfic I want to see more of. And I would definitely recommend it. Okay, we are down to what I am considering. It's 2 books, technically, but it's a duology. Absolutely my favorite in May. And I will be shocked if this is not on my favorites of the year list by the end of this year. And that is the Raybearer duology by Jordan Ifueko, which is Raybearer and Redemptor. I'm going to set I guess I'll just prop them up here so that you can see which ones I'm talking about. But man, I love this duology so, so much. As I have said before, don't read a ton of young adult fantasy anymore. Now that I'm in my late 30s, I just have a harder time connecting to younger characters. I have less patience for some of the tropes you find in young adult fantasy, but in every way, Raybearer was a success to me. It absolutely blows my mind that this was Ifueko's debut, because the character work in here is so good. And so the story follows Tarisai, who is essentially raised in the countryside by a very distant mother who she refers to as the lady. And she is essentially being groomed for a specific purpose. And the idea is that she's going to compete to join this council that works with the leader of the country that she's in. And they share it's a very found family aspect where they share a specific type of power that lets them all connect very closely to each other. And what the lady wants is for Tarisai to join that council and then kill the prince. And the whole story, the whole first book, is Tarisai trying to figure out how to find family, because she's been so isolated, never really had a personal connection to people because of the power that she has. One of the things she can do is that if she touches you, she can pick out memories. And if she touches items, she can get some of the memories from those items. So no one has wanted to touch her for fear of that. And so she's really trying to find that found family and that personal connection, while knowing that she has essentially been coerced into killing this prince. And she has no control over that, because she has been bred to do this, right? And kind of has this compulsion to do it. And I just love the found family vibe. I love the characters in this are amazing. Not only Tarisai, but the prince is such a cinnamon roll. He's so sweet. But I think what I appreciate about him is that it gets him into trouble sometimes. And I love a cinnamon roll who screws up sometimes. Like that's the kind of character I just really enjoy seeing. So that worked super well for me. I don't want to get into the plot for Redemptor because I don't want to spoil anything from the first one. But I will say that Redemptor really dives into these themes of imperialism and how you can make up for what previous generations have done in oppressing people and taking advantage of systems, and how important it is to fight some of those systems, but also not kill yourself doing that. And I think Tarisai, I don't want to get into details on that because, again, I don't want to spoil it, but I think the character work in these two books is impeccable. Jordan Ifueko did an amazing job with the characters and the themes, especially for something that is aimed at a younger audience, because I think it can be very easy to sort of tone down themes when you know you're writing for younger folks, and I'm so glad she didn't do that. I truly think it's incredible, and I would highly recommend this series. Again, it's going to be on my favorites of the year list. I can't wait to get to The Maid and the Crocodile, which is a book that just came out last year that's sort of like a semi-standalone, except that it refers to events in this series, which is the whole reason I picked it up, because I think I will love The Maid and the Crocodile now. So, absolutely love this series, and that is everything that I read in the month of May. Let me know if you have read any of these. I would love to hear your thoughts on them, even if you loved something that I ranted about at the beginning of this video. I appreciate anybody who made it to the end of my extremely long-winded talk about everything that I read, and if you just want to leave an emoji to say that you were here, just leave me a sun for Raybearer, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!